My husband handed me divorce papers at my birthday party. We're done. Mom's promoting my ex in your place, he laughed coldly. Pack your trash. His mother nodded, clean out your desk tomorrow. They left me standing alone. 3 days later, panicked voicemails. 78 of them after realizing who I really was. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. I never considered myself particularly lucky until the day I met Ronan Stafford. Before him, my life had been a methodical climb, built on discipline and a quiet refusal to fail. I'd put myself through business school, started my own small advisory firm, and earned a reputation for being the person you called when you needed honest, unflinching financial strategy, not empty promises. The boardroom of Stafford Financial Holdings buzzed with tension that morning, 5 years ago. I remember the smell of expensive coffee and the low hum of the air conditioning. 7 investment bankers, all men in perfectly tailored suits with practiced smiles, were there. Each one was hoping to secure the management contract for Margaret Stafford's newly acquired tech portfolio. Margaret, she was a force of nature, a matriarch who had built an empire with sheer will and a reputation for being ruthless. I was the last to present. Ms. Vance, your presentation was unconventional, Margaret said, leaning forward in her massive leather chair. Her gold bracelets caught the light. Everyone else showed me projections of double-digit returns. You showed me risks. Why? I held her gaze. It felt like the whole world stopped for a second. Because anyone promising guaranteed returns is either lying to you or to themselves, Mrs. Stafford. I prefer honesty from the start. A man sitting at Margaret's right, whom I hadn't paid much attention to until then, smiled. He had his mother's calculating eyes, but they were softened by something warmer, more magnetic. That was her son, Ronan. He whispered something to his mother. My son thinks you're either very brave or very stupid, Margaret said, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. I'm inclined to agree with his first assessment. The contract is yours. That was 5 years ago. And now, I was standing in our palatial home, the one overlooking the city lights, watching Ronan direct the catering staff for my 40th birthday party. Our marriage had followed a whirlwind romance that had surprised the entire financial district. No one had expected Margaret Stafford's son, the heir to the fortune, to marry someone like me, a self-made financial advisor with no family connections, whose past before her MBA remained mysteriously blank. You're staring again, Ronan said without turning, that uncanny way he had of sensing my gaze. Just admiring my extraordinary luck, I replied, walking over to him. He finally turned, his smile not quite reaching those magnetic eyes. It hadn't for months. Save the charm for the guests, Addie. My mother is bringing some important clients. Something in his tone sent a tiny, imperceptible chill through me. For months now, little moments like these had been accumulating. My analytical mind, the very thing that made me so good at my job, couldn't help but catalog them. Shorter conversations. Decreased physical affection, a hand pulled away too quickly, a goodnight kiss that felt more like a duty. Late nights at the office. And the way he angled his phone away from me whenever a text came in. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. That the pressures of his position were getting to him. We had a good life, a beautiful home, a partnership. Or so I thought. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced down. It was a message from Thea Russell. She was my former Army Ranger teammate and now the head of cybersecurity at my private firm, the one the Staffords knew nothing about. We'd been through hell and back together in another life, and she was the one person on this earth I trusted without question. The message was encrypted, as always. 3 short sentences. Need to talk. Found something. Not good. I slid the phone back into my pocket, my heart suddenly feeling heavy. Whatever it was, it would have to wait. Tonight was about maintaining appearances, a skill I'd perfected long before I ever met the Staffords. I straightened my dress, put on my best smile, and prepared to play the role of the charming, successful wife. The party was exactly as you'd imagine. The clinking of crystal glasses, the low murmur of conversations about stock prices and summer homes in the Hamptons. I moved through the crowd, playing my part perfectly, the gracious hostess, the brilliant wife of the Stafford heir. But under the surface, a cold dread was beginning to settle in. Thea's message was a splinter in my mind. Ronan seemed to vibrate with a nervous energy I hadn't seen in him before. He kept checking his watch, his eyes flicking towards the grand entryway every few minutes. "Expecting someone?" I asked casually, handing him a fresh glass of champagne. "Just wondering where Mom is," he replied, a little too quickly. "She's never late." And then, Margaret Stafford made her entrance. But she wasn't alone. Walking just behind her was a woman with vibrant copper hair and a confident swagger that felt uncomfortably familiar. My breath caught in my throat. Faye Winters. Ronan's college girlfriend. An old flame from before my time, one he'd always dismissed as ancient history. She'd been an executive at Stafford Holdings but had left for a competitor about 3 years ago, shortly after Ronan and I were married. And now, here she was, at my 40th birthday party. "Adeline," Margaret boomed, clapping me on the shoulder with a warmth that felt utterly fake. "Happy birthday, dear. You remember Faye, don't you?" "Of course," I replied evenly, my voice betraying none of the alarm bells screaming in my head. I extended my hand. "It's been a while, Faye." Faye's grip was unnecessarily firm. "Too long," she said, her eyes flicking toward Ronan, who was suddenly very interested in the bubbles in his champagne glass. "Congratulations on all your success, Adeline. You've done very well for yourself." The words were complimentary, but her tone was laced with something else. Something condescending. Then Margaret dropped the bomb, laughing as though it was the most amusing news in the world. "Faye's rejoining the company. We've been in talks for months, quite secretly, I might add." My face remained a pleasant, neutral mask, betraying none of the warning signals firing in my mind. The secret talks. The late nights at the office. Ronan's nervous energy. It was all starting to click into a terrifying picture. "What position?" I asked, my voice calm and casual. Margaret and Faye exchanged a look. It was a fleeting glance, but it was enough. It was a look of shared conspiracy. "Oh, we'll discuss business tomorrow," Margaret said dismissively. "Tonight is for celebration." For the rest of the evening, I watched them. It was like seeing a silent movie that only I understood. Ronan and Faye communicated in a private language of glances, subtle smiles, and tiny gestures. My instincts, honed through years of operating in hostile territory where missing a single cue could be fatal, were screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. This wasn't just a former rival returning to the company. This was a coup. And I was the target. Just after midnight, as the last of the guests departed, I found Ronan, Margaret, and Faye huddled together in the study. The moment I walked in, their animated conversation ceased abruptly. The silence was heavy and suffocating. "Perfect timing," Margaret said, her smile looking unnatural and stretched. "We were just discussing tomorrow's board meeting." "On my birthday," I said lightly, trying to inject some normalcy into the bizarre situation. "I'm flattered." No one laughed. Later that night, lying in the cold, silent space beside my husband in our king-sized bed, I finally pulled up my phone and read Theo's full, decrypted message. "They've been planning this for months. R has been transferring assets. F returned 2 months ago. They meet at the Princeton Hotel every Tuesday. I have everything documented. Call me." I closed my eyes, the screen of the phone casting a pale light on my face. Every betrayal indicator I had noticed but dismissed over the past few months now clicked into place. The coincidences that weren't coincidences. The meetings he never detailed. The subtle changes in his behavior. They weren't just signs of a failing marriage. They were acts of war. In the darkness of my bedroom, on my 40th birthday, I allowed myself a small, dangerous smile. They thought they were taking down Adeline Vance, the up-from-nothing financial advisor. They had no idea what they had just awakened. The morning after my so-called party, I rose before dawn. The sky was still a bruised purple as I left Ronan sleeping in our bed. I didn't drive to the gleaming Stafford Holdings tower. Instead, I went to my real office downtown, a discreet, unmarked building that housed the nerve center of my private operations. Thea Russell was waiting for me. Her massive, powerful frame looked almost comical behind a sleek, minimalist desk. Once the most feared combat specialist in our unit, Thea now hid her lethal abilities behind designer suits and cybersecurity credentials. She was my rock, my oldest friend. How bad? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. I needed the facts, cold and hard. Thea didn't waste a word. She slid a tablet across the desk. They've been methodical. Ronan's been meeting Faye for 6 months. Margaret brought her back 3 months ago as a consultant. They've been gradually transferring control of your joint assets. I scrolled through the contents of the tablet. My face revealed nothing, but inside, a cold fury was building with each swipe. There were surveillance photos of Ronan and Faye leaving the Princeton Hotel, looking far too comfortable. There were text messages, financial records, copies of emails. Thea had everything. The board votes today to install Faye as Chief Investment Officer, Thea continued, her voice a low rumble. Your position. There's a prenup clause about professional misconduct they're planning to trigger. They've manipulated 3 of your client portfolios to show losses. I stopped scrolling. They falsified records? They're not just trying to divorce you, Addie, Thea said grimly. They're trying to erase you. To humiliate you professionally, then strip you of everything personally. She handed me another document she'd intercepted. Divorce papers. Already prepared. I looked at the mountain of evidence. The meticulous, cold-blooded planning of it all. I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, yes. Hurt, on some level I hadn't accessed yet. But not surprised. The signs had all been there. Confirmation is clarifying, I said, setting the tablet down. My voice was steady. What's our play? Thea's eyes glinted. That's what I was waiting to hear. I leaned back in my chair. The soldier in me was taking over now. The strategist. The survivor. First, I said, we secure what's mine. Transfer everything from our contingency structures. Now. Done, Thea said, her fingers already flying across a keyboard. Second, I attend the board meeting. I walk in there as if I know nothing. And third? Thea asked, a slow smile spreading across her face. A cold smile of my own touched my lips. Third, I start dismantling their lives, piece by piece. An hour later, I walked into the Stafford Holdings boardroom. The energy was subdued, but thick with anticipation. Margaret sat at the head of the table, regal and severe. Faye was to her right, where I usually sat. And my husband, Ronan, was seated beside Faye, looking pale but resolute. Adeline, Margaret acknowledged coldly. We've already begun. By all means, continue, I said, taking the only remaining seat at the far end of the table, as far from the center of power as possible. I wanted them to think I was already defeated. For the next hour, I watched Faye present her masterpiece of deception. She walked the board through deliberately manipulated data from my accounts. 3 major portfolios I knew were performing well above market averages, were now showing significant, alarming losses. It was a brilliant, criminal performance. When she finished, Margaret turned to me, her eyes like chips of ice. "Do you have anything to add?" This was the moment. I stood up, slowly buttoning my jacket. The entire room was silent, watching me. "Just a question," I said calmly, my eyes locking with Margaret's. "When did you decide Faye would make a better daughter-in-law than me?" A collective gasp went through the room. Margaret's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "This is about business, not personal matters," she snapped. "Is it?" I replied, my voice dangerously soft. "Then you won't mind explaining to the board why your portfolio performance data has been falsified? Or why client funds were moved without authorization to create these artificial losses? Because that, as you all know, is a federal offense." "That's absurd," Faye interjected, her composure finally cracking. I ignored her, addressing the entire board. "Check the transaction logs. Compare them with the official reports filed with the regulators. Someone has been manipulating data. I've already submitted preliminary evidence to our compliance department and to the SEC. But don't worry," I added, letting my gaze sweep over the panicked faces of the board members. "I've made it clear that the board wasn't aware of these irregularities." The room erupted in frantic whispers. "This meeting is adjourned," Margaret announced sharply. Her eyes bored into me. "Adeline." "My office." "Now." Walking into Margaret's office felt like stepping into the lion's den. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful, composed matriarch had crumbled. All that was left was raw, sputtering rage. "You ungrateful little witch," she spat, the words ugly in the pristine, silent office. "I made you. Without my connections, you'd be nothing." I remained perfectly calm, standing before her desk. I didn't sit. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "Is that what you think?" "I know it," she seethed. "You were a charity case with a good head for numbers when Ronan found you. Everything you have is because of us." "An interesting perspective," I replied, my voice even. "Is that why you feel entitled to take it all away?" She moved closer, jabbing a finger towards my chest. "The board will side with me. They always do. By tomorrow, you'll be finished in this industry. You'll be a pariah." "Perhaps," I conceded. "But ask yourself this, Margaret. How much do you really know about the woman you invited into your family? The woman you're now threatening?" My voice dropped to a near whisper. "What if I'm not who you think I am?" Something in my eyes, some flicker of the woman I used to be in another life, made her take a step back. "You're bluffing," she said, but for the first time, a sliver of uncertainty had crept into her voice. "We'll see," I said, turning to leave. I paused at the door. "One more thing. When you and Ronan choreographed this little coup, did either of you remember that tonight was supposed to be my birthday dinner? The reservation at Le Bernardin? Just curious." I left her standing there, the first seeds of doubt planted. The drive home was quiet. The city lights blurred past my window, but I saw nothing. When I arrived, the house felt cold and hollow. Ronan was pacing nervously in the living room, still dressed in his boardroom suit. When he saw me, his expression shifted from anxiety to cold determination. "Mom called," he said, without preamble. "You've made some serious accusations." "Not accusations. Facts," I said, loosening the scarf around my neck. "Though I am curious which version of events she shared with you." Ronan crossed his arms, a defensive posture I knew all too well. "She said you're threatening to go to the authorities with fabricated evidence. That you're just trying to sabotage Faye's promotion because you're jealous." "Jealous?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Of the woman you've been sleeping with behind my back for 6 months? That would be redundant, don't you think?" His face went pale. For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked that I knew. Then the mask of defiance slammed back down. "Don't be ridiculous." "The Princeton Hotel," I stated flatly. "Tuesdays at lunch. Sometimes Fridays after work if I was traveling." "Should I continue, or are we past the denial stage?" His mask slipped completely then. Real surprise flickered across his features before his expression hardened into something ugly. "You had me followed." "It's what you'd expect," I finished for him, "given what I've discovered about the systematic effort to undermine my position and steal my clients." Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Margaret and Faye stood on the doorstep, both looking grim and ready for a fight. "Perfect timing," I said, gesturing them in with a sweep of my arm. We were just getting to the interesting part. Margaret strode in, radiating fury. Faye followed, her posture suggesting she was ready for a confrontation. "You think you're clever," Margaret snarled. "But you're out of your depth. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow. With one vote, you'll be removed and barred from the industry with a reputation so tarnished, you'll never work in finance again." And then came the moment that was clearly the climax of their little play. Ronan, with deliberate, cruel timing, reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope. He thrust it towards me. "You should have seen this coming," he said, his voice cold. I took the envelope without opening it. My own divorce papers. Handed to me in my own home by my husband, flanked by his mother and his mistress, just one day after my 40th birthday. "And this is how you chose to do it?" I asked, looking from his face to Margaret's, then to Faye's smug expression. "Not in private, but as a performance." Ronan laughed then, a harsh, ugly sound. "We're done, Addie. Mom's promoting my ex in your place. Pack your trash." Margaret nodded in agreement, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "Clean out your desk tomorrow." They left me standing alone in the vast, silent living room. Three of them, a united front, believing they had won. Believing they had destroyed me. I stood there for a long moment after they left, the unopened envelope feeling heavy and foreign in my hand. I looked around the room, at the art we'd chosen together, the photos on the mantelpiece, the life I thought we were building. All of it a lie. A carefully constructed stage for my eventual ruin. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The grief and the rage were there, simmering deep beneath the surface, but something else had taken over, a cold, clear-eyed focus. The soldier had taken command. I walked over to the bar, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I placed the unopened divorce papers on the polished surface, right next to our wedding photo. Then I poured myself a drink, a good, stiff bourbon. Nothing to say? It was Ronan. He hadn't left with the others. He was standing in the doorway to the hall, watching me with a taunting look on his face. He wanted to see me break. "Oh, I have plenty to say," I replied, taking a slow sip of my drink. The bourbon burned a welcome path down my throat. But actions speak louder than words, don't they? I turned to face him fully. "So instead of saying anything, I'll simply inform you of a few things. First, as of this morning, I no longer work for Stafford Holdings." He scoffed. "You can't quit. You're fired." "Semantics," I said with a shrug. "More importantly, as of 30 minutes ago, a private holding company called Willix Capital has acquired a controlling interest in Lister Technologies, Vanguard Dynamics, and Brightway Systems." I watched his face. The smug, confident expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He knew the names, of course. The color drained from his face. It was a slow, satisfying process to watch. That's impossible," he stammered. "Those are our three largest tech holdings." "They were," I corrected him gently. "Their boards voted unanimously for the acquisition this afternoon. It seems they became quite concerned after learning about certain irregularities in Stafford's management of their portfolios." Curiously, I added, taking another sip of my bourbon, those were the same 3 portfolios that were suddenly showing artificial losses in Faye's little presentation today. I let that sink in. I could practically see the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process the impossible. Did you really think the CEOs of those companies, men I have worked with for years, whose trust one have earned, wouldn't take my calls when you started manipulating their stock values? I asked, my voice soft but cutting. Did you think I was that stupid? That I wouldn't have contingencies? He looked like he'd been physically struck. He stumbled back a step, leaning against the doorframe for support. You can't do this. Those accounts, they represent 40% of our holdings. 37.6% to be precise, I said, setting my glass down. But who's counting? The arrogant, confident man who had handed me divorce papers just minutes ago was gone. In his place was a scared, bewildered boy who had just realized he'd picked a fight with someone far out of his league. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, walking past him towards the door. I believe I have a birthday dinner to attend. Alone. This isn't over, he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. I paused at the doorway and looked back at him one last time. You're right about that, I said. It's just beginning. I walked out of that house, leaving him standing alone in what had been our home. I didn't look back. Through the security cameras I'd had installed months ago, I later watched him, his mother, and Faye huddled in Margaret's car, frantically making calls. Their carefully constructed world was already unraveling. And I was just getting started. For the next 3 days, I went dark. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't respond to emails. To the Stafford family and the financial world, Adeline Vance had vanished. In that time, the chaos I had unleashed erupted. The SEC announced a formal investigation into Stafford Holdings. The company's stock plummeted by 40%. Major clients, spooked by the news of fraud, began withdrawing their business in a mass exodus. And where was I? Not hiding. Not licking my wounds. I was working. My real headquarters was a converted warehouse in an industrial district, a place that didn't exist on any public record. Inside was a sophisticated communication and operations center that would rival some government agencies. This was the nerve center of Axiom Capital, my real company, my global private investment firm. This was the source of my true power, a fortune and a network built over a decade, completely hidden from the Staffords. My team was comprised of 6 operatives, all former military specialists who had served with me. They were the best in the world at what they did. Thea gave me the report. Ronan has called 23 times, she said, glancing at a monitor displaying call logs. Margaret, 34. Faye, 16. They've left multiple panicked voicemails on all your numbers. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on a different screen. It showed a live surveillance feed of Stafford Holdings headquarters, where SEC agents were currently removing boxes of documents. Another screen showed a haggard-looking Margaret arriving at her lawyer's office. The prenup had a morality clause, said Maya Rodriguez, entering the room with a tablet. Once an intelligence analyst, Maya now handled our digital surveillance. Ronan's infidelity voids most of his protections. Your lawyer confirms the divorce can proceed on your terms. And the property transfers? I asked. Reversed, Maya confirmed. The attempt to move your joint assets triggered fraud alerts I planted in their system months ago. Everything's frozen pending the investigation. This was the part they never understood. They thought I was just a talented financial advisor. They saw what I wanted them to see, a capable woman with a convenient lack of family connections, a blank past that made me seem like a safe, rootless addition to their dynasty. The truth was, my past wasn't blank. It was deliberately and professionally erased. I was an orphan who'd enlisted at 18, been recruited for special operations at 20, and spent 8 years conducting missions you'll never read about. After that life, I built a new identity, a new fortune, a new world for myself in finance. I didn't need the Staffords' money or their name. I never had. What about their vulnerabilities? I asked the team. Maya swiped through several screens. Margaret's heavily leveraged. 3 of her properties have second mortgages. Her yacht is financed. Without that tech portfolio you acquired, she'll struggle to meet her obligations. Faye has significant gambling debts in Vegas and Macau, approximately $3 million. And Ronan. She paused. His personal accounts show regular transfers to a hidden account in the Caymans. Current balance, $12 million. Money he'd skimmed from our joint accounts over the years. Preparing his escape. The door to the command center opened and Victoria Castillo walked in. Once the handler for my Spec Ops team, she was now my chief strategist, a woman who saw the world as a chessboard. They're getting desperate, Victoria said without preamble. Margaret tried to contact our mutual friends at the State Department. She's looking for leverage against you. I smiled slightly. And? They denied knowing you personally, Victoria replied. Officially, you're just another financial advisor. Your file is sealed at a level she can't touch. As expected, I said. It was time for the next phase. I picked up a secure satellite phone that hadn't been used in 5 years and dialed Margaret Stafford's private line. She answered on the first ring. Adeline. Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what's happening? I have a fairly comprehensive understanding, I replied calmly. How are you holding up, Margaret? Cut the crap, she shrieked into the phone. The SEC is crawling through my offices. My clients are leaving. The board is calling for my resignation. You need to fix this. Fix what, exactly? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. The fraudulent transactions you approved? The client manipulations? Or perhaps your son's infidelity? Her voice lowered to a growl. Listen to me, you ungrateful. No games, Margaret, I interrupted. Just consequences. Though I am curious about something. When you brought Faye back, did you investigate where she'd been for the past 3 years? Her time with Meridian Capital? The client funds that mysteriously disappeared? There was a pause. What are you talking about? Perhaps you should ask her about the Liechtenstein accounts, I said softly. Or don't. The federal prosecutors will be asking her soon enough. Her breathing became audible over the line. What do you want? She finally whispered. Nothing you can provide, I replied. Check your email in 10 minutes. You'll find something interesting. I ended the call and nodded to Maya. She sent the prepared email, a detailed dossier of Faye's past financial crimes, complete with account numbers and transaction records. How many messages have they left now? I asked Thea. She checked the log. 78. 78 panicked voicemails in 3 days. After a lifetime of them underestimating me, they were finally beginning to realize who I really was. An hour later, I walked into the Stafford Holdings building for the first time since my birthday. The security guards looked uncertain, their instructions to keep me out conflicting with the sheer, unshakable confidence with which I moved through the lobby. I took the executive elevator to the top floor. I found them huddled in Margaret's office, Margaret, Ronan, and a visibly agitated Faye. Their conversation stopped abruptly when I entered. Adeline, Ronan breathed, standing quickly. His carefully styled hair was a mess, and his expensive suit looked rumpled. The lack of sleep was evident in the dark circles under his eyes. Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for days. I'm aware, I replied, remaining by the door. 78 messages. Quite persistent. Margaret looked as though she'd aged a decade in 3 days. Did you send those files about Faye? Whatever she sent you is fabricated. Faye snapped, her face contorted with rage. She's trying to drive a wedge between us. The Liechtenstein accounts aren't fabricated, I said mildly. Neither are the transactions you authorized using client funds. The regulatory authorities in 3 countries have been building that case for 2 years. Faye lunged forward, but I sidestepped easily, and she stumbled against the desk. Physical confrontation, Faye? Is that your solution? I straightened my cuffs. How disappointing. Ronan stepped forward then, his expression shifting to one I recognized, the calculated charm he employed when trying to manipulate a situation. Adeline, please, he said, his voice softening. This has all spiraled out of control. We need to talk, privately. We are talking, I replied. Though I'm curious, what changed? 3 days ago, you were quite confident in your decision to end our marriage. The situation has changed, Margaret interjected, wiping sweat from her brow. We can come to an arrangement. One that benefits everyone. You could return as CEO. Faye would be gone. You'd have complete control. I looked at Ronan. And what about the divorce? He hesitated, then took a step closer. We could reconsider. We've had 5 good years, Addie. One mistake shouldn't erase that. One mistake? I repeated, the words dripping with ice. Is that how you characterize 6 months of deception? The systematic effort to undermine my position? The theft of our joint assets? I saw his face pale at the mention of the money. The Cayman account, Ronan. $12 million, transferred gradually over 2 years. Did you think I wouldn't find that? I turned to Margaret. You never really knew me, did you? Any of you. You saw what I wanted you to see. A capable financial advisor with a convenient lack of family connections. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. Did you never wonder why a woman with my abilities, my resources, would settle for a mid-level position in your mediocre company? What are you saying? Margaret demanded. I'm saying that before I built Axiom Capital, yes, that Axiom Capital, with offices in 11 countries, I spent 8 years in special operations, conducting missions you'll never read about. I'm saying that the woman you tried to destroy has resources you cannot begin to comprehend. The room fell silent. The air was thick with their shock and dawning horror. Why? Ronan finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. If you had all that, why marry me? Why work for my mother? My expression softened for a fraction of a second. Because 5 years ago, I believed you were different. I believed what we had was real. My eyes hardened again. A miscalculation on my part. I turned to leave, then paused. There was one more thing they needed to know. The real reason. There's something none of you have asked, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. Not once in all this chaos. You never asked, why? Why would I marry into a family like yours? Why would I build your business, expand your influence, strengthen your position for 5 years? I looked directly at Margaret. It wasn't for love, though I admit that became a complication. It wasn't for money or connections. I had plenty of both. Then why? She demanded. Because of Thomas and Elizabeth Keller, I said quietly. Her face remained blank, but I saw a flicker of recognition in the eyes of her lawyer, who was cowering in a corner of the room. Who? Ronan asked. My parents, I replied, my voice dangerously soft. Though I was born Adeline Keller. They owned a regional investment firm in the Midwest. Small, but successful. 23 years ago, they were approached by an aggressive New York firm looking to expand. Stafford Acquisitions. Understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes. A look of pure horror. Within 6 months, they were ruined, I continued, my voice ice cold. My father had a heart attack under the stress. My mother, she took her own life 3 months later. It was all documented in your private files, Margaret. You called it aggressive competitive tactics. I called it murder. That was business, she protested, her voice weak. It became personal when I found myself an orphan at 18 because of your ruthlessness, I said. You're insane, Faye blurted out. No, I replied. I'm methodical. Everything that's happening now was set in motion years ago. Now, federal agents are on their way here to execute search warrants. They are particularly interested in the source of funds for those offshore accounts you've been filling for years, Margaret. As I walked away, Ronan rushed after me. Adeline, wait. Whatever you think happened, we can fix this. I turned, studying his face, a face I had once loved. There's nothing to fix, Ronan, I said. It's already done. The fall of the House of Stafford was swift and brutal. It dominated the financial news for weeks. Margaret and Faye remained in federal custody, denied bail. The empire she had built was dismantled, sold for parts to pay off debts and fines. Ronan, thanks to a plea deal, was released on house arrest, confined to a modest apartment with an ankle monitor, all his assets frozen. He was a shadow of the man he had been, stripped of his wealth, his power, and his pride. A few weeks into his confinement, I received a call from his lawyer. Ronan claimed to have information for me. Something vital. He said it was something his father, who had passed away years before Margaret took full control of the company, had left for him. A secret he was meant to keep, even from his own mother. I was skeptical. It sounded like a desperation play. But my curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to a meeting, at a neutral location, with my security team present. He looked diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. Thank you for seeing me, Adeline, he said, not meeting my eyes. You have 5 minutes, Ronan, I replied, my voice flat. He pushed a small, encrypted USB drive across the table. My father left this for me. He told me to open it only if she ever went too far. If her ambition ever became truly destructive. He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a strange mix of shame and sorrow. I should have looked at this years ago. What is it? I asked. It's proof, he said, his voice cracking. Proof that my mother, she wasn't the mastermind behind what happened to your parents. She was ambitious, yes. Ruthless, absolutely. But she was also a tool. I stared at him, my mind racing. A tool for whom? Eleanor Whitley, he whispered, the name hanging in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor Whitley. The billionaire investor, the celebrated philanthropist, a woman whose reputation for integrity was unimpeachable. She was a titan of industry, a close friend of the Stafford family for decades. She was Ronan's godmother. That's absurd, I said, though a cold knot was forming in my stomach. Whitley had no official connection to your mother's business back then. Not officially, Ronan agreed. But she financed the entire Stafford acquisitions division through a series of shell companies. She personally selected the targets for hostile takeovers. Your parents' firm was one of them. My mother was essentially her instrument, her attack dog. This drive, it has my father's notes, copies of secret correspondence, transaction records. He knew what Eleanor was doing, and it terrified him. I picked up the drive, my fingers feeling numb. For 23 years, my entire life had been focused on one target, Margaret Stafford. My vengeance was built on the foundation of her guilt. Now, to learn that she was just a symptom, and that the true disease was still out there, untouched, celebrated. Why give this to me now, Ronan? I asked, my voice barely audible. Because what I did to you is unforgivable, he said, looking down at his hands. I deserve whatever comes my way. But Whitley, she's still out there, still destroying lives the same way she destroyed your parents. Don't you want the complete truth? It's the only thing I have left to give you. After he left, I took the drive back to my command center. Thea and Maya worked for hours, triple-checking the data, authenticating every file. It was all genuine. Emails, financial records, and even scanned notes in Ronan's father's handwriting, documenting Eleanor Whitley's involvement in a series of predatory acquisitions spanning 2 decades. The Keller case was featured prominently, with specific instructions from Whitley to Margaret on how to systematically dismantle my family's business and break my father's spirit. My entire world tilted on its axis. My revenge, so meticulously planned and executed, was incomplete. The real enemy had remained in the shadows all along. I stood before the large map in our command center, the map displaying our global assets. But I wasn't seeing our holdings. I was seeing a new battlefield. Gilbert was a symptom, I said to my team, my voice hard as steel. Whitley is the disease. Victoria cautioned me. Eleanor Whitley is on another level, Adeline. She has powerful connections, political allies, friends in intelligence agencies. She won't be as easy to topple as Margaret. Good, I said coldly. I was beginning to think this had been too easy. The mission wasn't over. It had just found its true north. Taking down Eleanor Whitley required a different kind of strategy. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was an institution, wrapped in a protective layer of philanthropy and political influence. A direct assault would be suicide. I needed to be a ghost, a whisper, a virus in her system. The perfect opportunity presented itself, Eleanor Whitley's 70th birthday celebration. It was the social event of the season, held at her palatial estate in the Hamptons. The guest list was a who's who of the global elite, senators, finance titans, celebrities, all paying homage to the grand dame of industry. None of them knew that my team had the entire property under complete surveillance. My operatives were posing as catering staff, security personnel, and even as the dates of some invited guests. From my command center in Manhattan, I watched the festivities through dozens of hidden camera feeds, like a goddess on a digital Olympus. Our source confirms Whitley received the package, Maya reported, her voice calm in my earpiece. Her security team is examining it now. Earlier that day, a discreet messenger had delivered a small, elegant box to Whitley's office. Inside was nothing but a flash drive and a note with 2 words, I know. She's leaving the main ballroom, Thea observed, tracking Whitley's movement through the mansion. Heading to her private study with her head of security. I watched on the monitor as the elderly but still imposing Whitley dismissed her security detail outside the study door, then entered alone. It was a room fortified against the world, soundproof and secure. But my team had breached its digital defenses weeks ago. I could see and hear everything. Just as I had anticipated, she inserted the flash drive into her computer. The drive contained a single video file. When she opened it, she found herself looking at my face. Good evening, Ms. Whitley, my recorded voice began. We haven't been formally introduced. My name is Adeline Keller, though you knew my parents as Thomas and Elizabeth. On the surveillance feed, Whitley's composed expression shifted from confusion to shock. Yes, those Kellers, the recording continued. The family whose business you destroyed 23 years ago through your proxy, Margaret Stafford. I'm sure you've been following Margaret's recent troubles. What you may not realize is that those troubles were orchestrated by me, as the first phase in a project that has now expanded to include you. Whitley reached for her phone but hesitated as my recorded voice continued, cold and precise. You're wondering how much I know. The answer is everything. The 16 regional firms you systematically dismantled. The families you ruined. The 3 suicides directly attributable to your predatory tactics. And, of course, the Russian money you've been laundering through your philanthropic foundation for the past decade. Whitley's face went ashen. The blood drained from it so fast she looked like a marble statue. Dossiers containing this information are being delivered to the offices of the FBI, the SEC, and the federal prosecutors already handling the Stafford case, the video concluded. Similar packages are being sent to major financial publications. However, there is an alternative. In exactly 1 hour, you will receive a call on your private line. If you wish to discuss options that might mitigate the public dimensions of this situation, you will answer. If not, I wish you luck with what follows. The video ended. Whitley sat motionless, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of her desk. Then, with a sudden burst of fury, she slammed her fist down and snatched her secure phone. "She's calling her crisis team," Thea reported, monitoring the communication. "Demanding immediate verification of the claims." "Right on schedule," I said. My team had already seeded their systems with corroborating data. They would find that my claims were, terrifyingly, true. Exactly 1 hour later, I called her private line. She answered on the first ring. Her voice, when it came, was steady, betraying none of the panic I had seen on her face. She was a true predator, composed even when cornered. "You have my attention, Ms. Keller," Eleanor Whitley said. "Though I must say, your approach lacks subtlety." "Subtlety is a luxury for those with time to spare," I replied, my voice equally calm. "You've already had your people confirm the authenticity of my information, so let's not waste time with denials." There was a brief silence. "What do you want? Justice? How melodramatic. If it's money you're after, name your price." "Everyone has one." "My parents didn't," I countered. "That's why you had to destroy them instead of buying them." Another pause. "Business is rarely personal, Ms. Keller. Your parents were simply obstacles to a larger objective. And now you're an obstacle to mine," I said coldly. "How does it feel, knowing your entire legacy, everything you've built, is about to collapse?" "You're overestimating your position," she replied, a hint of confidence returning to her voice. "I've weathered far worse threats than you. Do you really think I've survived 6 decades in this business without contingency plans? Without friends in places you can't touch?" "I'm counting on those friends," I said. "In fact, I've prepared special packages for each of them. Senator Hargrove, Director Collins at the Bureau, Judge Westmoreland. Comprehensive documentation of their involvement in your schemes. Tell me, Eleanor, how loyal will they remain when their own freedom is at stake?" The silence that followed was long and heavy. I had struck home. I had targeted her network, her true source of power. "You can destroy me," she finally said, her voice lower. "But consider the collateral damage. Thousands of employees, charitable foundations, pension funds. Are you prepared for that?" "An appeal to collateral damage," I noted. "From the woman who drove my mother to suicide without a flicker of remorse." "Your concern for others is noted, but not persuasive." "What do you propose?" she asked bluntly. "Meet me tomorrow. The location will be sent to your driver 1 hour before. Come alone. Any security personnel, any surveillance, any deviation from my instructions will trigger the immediate release of all materials to the press." "And if I agree to this meeting?" "Then," I said, savoring the words, "I will present you with terms that might allow you to end your life in something other than disgrace and prison." I hung up. The trap was set. The meeting location I selected had a grim, symbolic significance. It was a small, abandoned bank building in the Midwest, covered in dust and forgotten by time. It had once housed the regional headquarters of Keller Financial Services, my father's company. I arrived 6 hours early, my team securing the location and neutralizing 3 separate surveillance teams Whitley had predictably positioned along the approach routes. She would think she was coming alone. She emerged from her luxury sedan looking uncharacteristically vulnerable without her usual entourage. Inside the dusty main floor of the bank, I waited at a small table, the only furniture in the vast, empty space. Sunlight filtered through the dirty windows, illuminating dancing dust particles. Her eyes took in the faded sign still visible on one wall, "Keller Financial, building your future together." Theatrical, Whitley commented, taking the seat across from me. I suppose I should appreciate the symmetry. This is where my father had his heart attack, I said quietly. Right where you're sitting now. After his third meeting with Margaret Stafford, when he realized everything he'd built was being systematically dismantled. Whitley's expression remained neutral. The finance industry has always been Darwinian, Ms. Keller. The strong survive. Is that how you justify it? I asked. I don't need to justify sound business decisions, she replied. You mentioned terms. I placed a document on the table between us. It detailed the complete divestiture of all her holdings, her immediate resignation from all boards, a full public confession, and financial restitution to the 16 families she had destroyed. That's not a negotiation, she said, after reading the first page. It's a surrender. It's an alternative to what you deserve, I countered. She leaned back, studying my face, searching for any weakness. Finding none, she gave a small, weary sigh. Then, a thin, cruel smile crossed her lips. Before I give you my answer, I have a question. What happened to Margaret's son? Ronan. Why do you ask? Professional curiosity, she said. You see, Ronan isn't just Margaret's son. He's my godson. I've known him since birth. Guided his education. Helped shape his worldview. Her smile widened. Who do you think suggested he pursue you after your initial meeting with Margaret? Who provided the detailed psychological profile that helped him become exactly the kind of man you would fall for? The revelation landed like a physical blow, though I allowed no emotion to show on my face. My entire marriage. The whirlwind romance. The man I thought I loved. All of it, a script. Written by her. You're lying, I said flatly. Am I? She replied softly. Ask yourself. How convenient was it all? A woman with your talent and your hidden past was the perfect asset to get inside the Stafford empire, an empire I wanted to eventually control completely through my proxy, Margaret. You were an unforeseen complication, but a useful one for a time. My entire life for the past 5 years flashed before my eyes, a carefully orchestrated lie. Every shared laugh, every intimate moment, was tainted. This changes nothing, I said finally, my voice like stone. Your manipulation may have extended further than I realized, but the end result remains the same. You will sign this agreement, or you will face the consequences. She studied me for a long moment. Then she picked up the pen. You've won this round, Ms. Keller, she said. As I watched my decades-long enemy sign away her empire, her fortune, and her legacy, I should have felt triumph. Instead, all I felt was a vast, chilling emptiness. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting with the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you gave me a like, and it tells me that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement that cheers me on. Please, comment with the number 1, and listen as I tell you the rest of my story. 3 months passed. A strange, quiet tranquility settled over my life for the first time in, well, forever. Bradford Whitley, Eleanor Whitley, complied meticulously with every term of our agreement. She divested her holdings, resigned from her positions, and prepared her detailed public confession. My team monitored her every move, ensuring there were no tricks, no last-minute betrayals. The day her confession was released, the financial world reeled. It was an earthquake that shattered the careers of politicians, regulators, and titans of industry who had been complicit in her schemes. But more importantly, the 16 families who had been destroyed by her predatory tactics received not only financial restitution through anonymous trusts I had set up, but public vindication. Their names were cleared. Their stories were told. Justice, delayed for decades, was finally served. I watched the news coverage from my office, surrounded by my core team, Victoria. It's done, Victoria said quietly. After all these years. I nodded, my expression thoughtful. It was done. The people who destroyed my family had faced the consequences. My parents' names had been cleared. The single, burning purpose that had driven me for 23 years was extinguished. And in its place, there was a void. What now? The question echoed in the silence of the room. For so long, my life had been defined by this mission of vengeance. Who was I without it? The Whitley phase is done, I said, more to myself than to them. The Stafford phase is done. But there are others like them out there. Other families being destroyed by powerful people who believe they are beyond accountability. Thea looked at me, a knowing smile on her face. A new mission? A better purpose, I corrected her. My parents built their business to help people secure their futures, to protect what they'd worked for. In the end, there was no one to protect them. I turned to face my team, my family. But we can protect others. Over the following year, Axiom Capital transformed. We shifted from traditional investment services to specialized operations targeting predatory financial practices. Our unique combination of intelligence backgrounds and financial expertise made us a formidable force for good. As for the others? Margaret Stafford received a 20-year sentence for her crimes, effectively a life sentence at her age. Faye Winters, in exchange for testimony, received 12 years. And Ronan, benefiting from his cooperation against Whitley, he was sentenced to 5 years, eligible for parole after 3. I never spoke to him again. 6 months after her public confession, Eleanor Whitley was found dead in her substantially reduced home. The official cause was suicide. But rumors persisted of connections to the Russian entities who were none too pleased about their money laundering operations being exposed. I didn't care either way. Her reign was over. On the anniversary of my parents' deaths, I visited their graves for the first time in years. The small Midwestern cemetery was peaceful, a world away from the financial battlefields where I had waged my war. As I placed flowers on their shared headstone, I felt a sense of completion. Not the cold satisfaction of revenge, but the warmer recognition of justice served. It's done, I told them quietly. Your name has been cleared. I paused, feeling the weight of 2 decades lifting from my shoulders. I'm building something new now. Something worthy of your legacy. On the way back to the airport, my phone rang. It was Victoria. The Reynolds family in Seattle, she reported without preamble. Small investment firm being systematically targeted by Meridian Global. Classic predatory tactics. They've reached out through our new foundation. Investigate thoroughly, I instructed, a new sense of purpose settling over me. If it's confirmed, prepare a full response strategy. Already in progress, Victoria confirmed. This one feels familiar. I looked out the window of the car as the autumn fields rolled by. A new mission. A better purpose. The inheritance of vengeance had served its purpose, clearing the path for something better to take root. Not forgiveness, some wounds go too deep for that. But a way forward. Then we know exactly what to do, I replied. So that's my story. It was a long, dark road, but I came out the other side. Not unscathed, but stronger. And with a new reason to get up in the morning. Thank you, truly, for listening. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt unheard or wronged, please share your thoughts in the comments below. It means the world to know we're not alone. Take care of yourselves.